Welcome back to Creekside Chats at San Pedro Creek Culture Park. As you've seen with the previous Creekside Chats episodes, this educational series explores the many aspects that make the park what it is today: its natural environment, its flood control functions, as well as its history and culture.
Hello, I'm John Mize, the principal of Ford, Powell, and Carson Architects, and also the principal in charge for our work on the San Pedro Creek project. When we first began to talk about the project with the River Authority and HDR, it was made pretty clear that we were going to be working with a very tight, very limited budget. And so we knew there was going to be some challenges there, which meant primarily we were going to have a lot more landscape and softscape on the project than hardscape, particularly when you compare those to the phases which have already been completed and which are under construction north of Nueva Street. So there's going to be a visual difference here, but at the same time, we wanted to try to maintain as much continuity of material and design elements so that when somebody walks underneath the Nueva Street Bridge, it didn't look like a completely different project. So we are using a lot of the same railing details. We are using the same interpretive panel system design. We are using the same wayfinding system that was used in the upper phases. So there's a sense of continuity there that people will know how to navigate the creek, know where they are. And so there's that sense of continuity which we felt was very important, even though design-wise it's a very different project in terms of the amount of landscape we have as opposed to the sections further upstream on the creek. When we get into phase 3, which is the section beginning at South Alamo Street and down to the confluence with Apache Alazan and the trail there, it's going to be much different character than the sections further upstream. It's going to be much more like the Mission Reach, very more of a habitat restoration, but there will still be pedestrian amenities. There will be a pedestrian trail on one side, primarily on the west side of the creek, and there'll be some amenities. One of the main features we're going to have is what is now referred to as Culvert Park. There are existing drainage culverts in the creek. We're going to add one for flood flow, but we're going to create a major public space there with shade structure which can be used for small musical events, film, a number of different things, and whatever can be programmed there, which I think that will be a really nice amenity to that part of the creek. The museum reach was very complicated, particularly when we working on the design of the lock system there at Brooklyn Avenue. It's a very different project in the sense that we had much larger right-of-way to work with, whereas San Pedro Creek is very constricted. So we're having to do a lot more channel modifications in terms of the depth of the channel in order to handle the anticipated flood flows. The museum reach was interesting in that before we actually began construction on the project, there wasn't a lot of activity from the places that bordered the creek. But once construction started, it really began to take off in terms of the public interest in the project. The creek is, in a lot of ways, a more complicated project than the museum reach was, although I don't want to discount how complicated that project was to develop. But the advantage that the museum reach has that San Pedro Creek does not have is we had a lot more right-of-way to work with on the river than what we have on the creek, particularly in phase 1.3 and 2. So the complexity of dealing with that is a lot more than when you have a much larger area to deal with. We're having to accommodate the flood flows by deepening the channel to a great degree, much more so than we had to do on the river. We widen it where we can, where we do have some additional right-of-way in the lower sections. And the other difference is that San Pedro Creek is much more of a flood control project than I think the river was. All that was definitely a component. It was really more of an urban linear development, and while flood control was a part of it, it did not have the importance that San Pedro Creek does to the areas around that. And that's one of the major goals, is to reduce that 100-year floodplain to the extent we can by improving the conveyance of the creek further downstream. Like the river, we've got some important neighbors that will be adjoining the creek, particularly in phase 1.3 and just upstream. The new federal courthouse on the west bank of the creek just south of Nueva is under construction. We have been coordinating with them to make sure that we work with them, addressing their security needs in terms of the design of the trail. And then just upstream from Nueva is the new UTSA cybersecurity and data science building. While they're not technically in our section, we are working with them to make sure that what we do does not impact anything that they plan. Further downstream, we have the KIPP Academy, which is already constructed on the west bank of phase 3, but we want to work with them to the extent we can to make sure that if there are any amenities we can provide there, budget allowing, we can do so. One interesting aspect of San Pedro Creek in phase 3 is that we will be designing and replacing the existing Union Pacific Railroad Bridge, which is there now. That's just downstream from South Alamo. That's obviously primarily a structural problem, but as with our landscape architects, we'll be working with them to coordinate the trail as it passes underneath the bridge. There'll be a low water crossing in that area between the bridge and South Alamo Street, so we'll be actually going underneath the new bridge when it's completed. The other nice thing about San Pedro Creek is where it ties into Apache Alazan Creek, which will connect people to the west side. It will also connect you to the river because Apache Alazan flows into the Mission Reach right at across from Mission Concepcion. So it's another link in the entire system of creeks and pathways that will, that go all the way through the city. And it will just provide a great opportunity for people to get out, use the river, experience the creek, and it's just a great amenity to have. The thing I like about working on projects like the Museum Reach and San Pedro Creek and the West Side Creeks, even with the complexity of those projects and the coordination with the Corps of Engineers that we have to work through and other agencies, I mean, at the end of the day, they're really kind of fun. But there's also the impact on the city. It provides nice amenities for the residents and the visitors. Throughout my career at Ford, Powell, and Carson, I've had the opportunity to work on a number of really important projects around this that have impacted the city and around the state. But the work on the river and the creek are really two of the lifebloods of the city, and in order to get the opportunity to work on these two projects and improve them and make them a real amenity for for everybody, it's a really gratifying experience.
You can view this video and other virtual series on our Facebook page or our website at spcculturepark.com. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.